For my intercultural project, I attended a mass service at an evangelical Spanish church. They're a multicultural church that welcomes all kinds of cultures. As a kid, I did go to Baptist church, so I'm very familiar with Christianity. This Spanish church, however, is much different than the one I was used to as a kid. For the main reason is because it's a Spanish church. They give their sermons in Spanish for the most part, but they do have English, and they do translate to English for some of the stuff. Another major difference between what I was used to and what I attended is that it was an evangelical church. It's like a Baptist church, but in a way that they believe in God, but it also is different how they go about their services and praises. The mass started out with an opening prayer, and then the preacher began to talk about stuff happening in the community, and then led into his sermon. This is much like my church because they always led out with stuff that's happening in the community, and then he went into his sermon. The sermon was somewhat difficult to understand though because most of it was in Spanish, but I do happen to speak a little bit of Spanish, so I was able to catch certain words and sentences here and there, which helped better understand what they were talking about. After he started his sermon, he would stop, and then everyone would sing a few songs out of the songbook, and it all ended with a prayer and then dismissed everyone. When we were singing the songs, it was a little bit difficult for me to understand because most of them were in Spanish, but they were basically the same songs, they just obviously were in Spanish. Major difference between how my church functioned versus one that I attended is that but right after the preacher gives a little bit of a sermon, we sing a bunch of songs and then go into a prayer, and then he goes back to his sermon. Another big difference was the sermon. The preacher focuses more on Bible recitals and stories from it, whereas my church preacher takes a verse out of the Bible and puts it into the real world and how we act, how we should act, and God's word to act. But other than that small stuff and the way the preacher gave his sermons, there wasn't a whole lot of differences which I found. I found this very interesting because I always thought it would be very different from what I was used to, but it turns out it's not. They believe in the same stuff, they do the same stuff, it's just in Spanish versus English. From my observations, there wasn't really any gender differences that I was used to seeing. They basically did all the same stuff that I'm used to seeing. There were a few cultural differences though, however, such as when they preached and how they went about preaching it. These differences though didn't really affect my interaction between not being able to completely understand what they were saying. Differences really didn't affect my interaction though because I wasn't able to completely understand what they were saying anyways. From my observation, they valued the word of the Bible and valued it the same as my culture does, even though it's in a different manner. This was one way I was able to relate with what I was at. It helped me see that not only is there other cultures that are like the one I am, but they're different, but they do the same stuff. Overall, this presentation has made me see how different cultures aren't as different to mine as I thought previously. They worship the same person, even though it was in a different way than I am used to, it was still the same. I learned a lot from going to this event. It was well worth the time I spent going. This presentation was a great experience. I'm very glad that I got to be part of it. If I had to do it again, I'd probably do just about the same thing I did. It was a great experience learning about the different culture of style of church that the Spanish evangelical church is. It was very informative, and it even helped me go research the church more and see how it all got started and why they started. And it was just a great experience, and I'm glad I got to do it. Sources cited were oecumene.org, evangelicalfocuses.com, and the gospelcoalition.org.